Now, from children whose fingers are scalded for stealing 100 shillings to scores of women flogged by their partners for countless reasons, the tales of domestic violence are as shocking as they are sad. Now, on the 25th of November, Uganda will join the rest of the world to commemorate the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So tonight, we explore the extent of gender-based violence, its causes and possible mitigations. I am joined by Arthur Larocque from ActionAid Uganda and Dr. Shilandya Nabanji, who is obviously no stranger to Let's Talk. Welcome to NTV Let's Talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, with statistical data, Arthur, and this is directed at you, how big a problem is domestic violence in Uganda?
It's a massive problem, really. And I think it affects women more than men. A study that CEDOVIP did, the Center for Domestic Violence, as well as ActionAid, indicated that domestic violence targeted at women is at 89%. That's 4 times or 5 times more than domestic violence towards the other gender. We also know that from our studies as well, and those by the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, that at least 24% of women have reported to have been forced into sex in their first encounter. That's a huge statistic as well. Finally, the scale of domestic violence appears to be increasing. I think the media has done a fantastic job recently, but domestic violence seems to be a major challenge in our country at the moment.
Why would you say this is the case?
Well, I think the origin of all this should be an understanding of what I call the political economy of the household. Okay. I think a lot of evidence from our work across the country as ActionAid suggests that the state of the family and who controls resources does have a huge bearing on domestic violence. For instance, from our work at ActionAid, we have confirmed that domestic violence increases up to 4 times during harvest seasons, for instance, because that is the time when, crops have been harvested, and then, struggles around who controls the money out of the sale. And it declines during times of planting and weeding. And so it's really funny, but it's a reality that we have documented from all our centers. The other reason, I think, is that there are more cases being reported. Okay. And why? I think partly because of the work that government and NGOs are doing with regards to sensitization and public education about all legislations that are put in place. And so more people are willing to report these cases. Now, whether they get justice is another question.
And we shall get to that.
Yeah,
Dr. Sheila, in your experience as a counsellor, what are some of the reasons that come up in your work for why men are battering their wives or wives battering their men? Because wives do that as well.
I think when you look at it, many times it is not that the wives have done anything wrong, or that even if they have done it, is that they have intended to do it. But I think a lot of it is the insecurity among the men. The insecurity, feeling that, women are going to take control, and then they want to sometimes to become harsh so that they can subdue them, to be able to control, for example, as he said, to control the money. But we have a very big crop of insecure, inferior men who have an inferiority complex, and that's a very dangerous crop of men, because they tend to show their power by using the macho power now to subdue, to ridicule. And I don't want us to think only of when we talk about domestic violence, people think of the beating. And I know there are many men out there saying, oh, what are they talking about? I am not one of those who do domestic violence. I have never beaten my wife. But abusing, ridiculing, denying women, their rights, denying them money, like somebody has said, has harvested crops, you sell, you go and drink away the money. All those are forms of domestic violence. So when you look, the statistics are actually much higher than even what is reported.
Okay, it's very interesting that you mention abuse, not necessarily the physical bit, and that brings me to the next question. We hear a lot of stories about women reporting cases of abuse, but I do know of some men who are actually abused by their wives, but we do not hear that many of these stories. Why is this the case?
The answer
and
is,
who's attending to these men anyway who are being abused in their relationships?
Well, the answer is obvious. I think men, because of the social construction around gender, men usually feel they are the stronger sex, they should contain, they feel embarrassed to go and report. But I think increasingly, through our centers, for instance, we have reached out to as many as 6,000 men. While the trend of men coming to report cases is not as high as women, partly because the reality is that 89% of the violence is targeted at women.
At the women.
At least few do come, especially in northern Uganda. That seems to be a situation in which men are sometimes on the receiving end.
I think in the urban class and in the elite class, there is maybe a little more of the women abusing the men. Especially where men lose jobs, they're unemployed, or they are not able to keep up the financial situation, and then the women are empowered. I'm seeing, for me, I'm seeing I've seen men who come to me now for counseling because, and you really see there is a lot of domestic violence from the women. Some of the girls have gone wild.
Wow.
But to police, I don't think they are.
They'll not go to police.
They'll
not go to police. They'll go for counseling, maybe, but not police.
Again, how effective would you say is the judicial system in terms of offering reprieve to victims of domestic violence? Well,
from our work and experience both in urban and rural areas, this is really the crux of the problem, because the judicial system is not really effective, to be very honest. And there are a number of reasons that explain that. One, for instance, we have statistics that from our centers, out of 768 cases, for instance, reported in Mubende alone, 200 were to do with defilement, and out of those 200, over 200 cases, only 10 were taken, to court. So at the end of the day, you feel like, why should I even go and bother now and report? 30 were to do with rape, and less than 3 were taken to court. So the question is, why do I bother? Now, what explains some of these reasons? I will give you, without giving the name of this particular police station around Kampala that we work closely with. The Welfare and Probation Office, they are really grossly underfunded. They are, every month, their budget is, 20,000 shillings.
20,000 Uganda shillings.
Yeah, Welfare and Probation
Office.
Yeah, exactly. It's not even lunch for some people. So the point really that needs to be made is that given the trends that are of domestic violence increasing, and listen to this statistic, domestic violence accounted in 2011 for 77 billion Uganda shillings. There is an organization that has done a cost of domestic violence, and in that year, it was 0.3% of GDP. Now that requires more serious government response. And if you have a welfare and probation office operating at 20,000, really they can't respond. In rural areas, the police just have no capacity. They do not have fuel. They do not have a car. They have to depend on a lot of our work. And we are happy for us to complement, but government needs to do a lot more prioritization and injection of resources here, so that people, the state is more responsive to this injustice that is happening every day, but also it will inspire and encourage people to report. So that really is the state that is not a very nice picture, but yeah,
it's definitely a very sorry state. And away from that very sorry state, Dr. Sheila, it is not uncommon to hear women make excuses for their partners, especially those who are in abusive relationships. In your experience, why do you think we do that?
It is culture. Most cultures expect that when a woman gets married, she should stay in the marriage,
regardless of what's
going on. So people feel ashamed to leave a marriage even when they are suffering, so they try to push on. Another issue, it is for children's sake. Because in our culture, it is women who take care of their children, who do most of the upbringing of the children. And in many cases, when women leave the home, the children suffer and they are abused by stepmothers, by their own fathers. Many of the children suffer. So there are many women who sacrifice themselves for the sake of their children. So I think this long-term solution maybe would be to empower women so that if they leave a marriage, they can be able to take their children and look after them and be able to handle. I think that's what, because many women feel they will not be able to handle their children on their own. When they leave, they'll be forced to leave them behind so that their father can look after them, and in many cases they suffer. But also the culture. I know met one woman, she came to my office and she was crying all the time. She was being really abused. And then when I told her, what do you think you should say, said, then her friend told her, now should she leave? Then I said, what to do? So I said, to leave her marriage. I asked her, does she have a marriage to talk about?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Said, is there a marriage? So
but
they fear.
It's interesting. It's interesting that one of the reasons you've cited is women do not want to leave their children behind. But how are these children supposed to survive in an environment where all they see is violence? And how are these children actually supported in coping?
It's a terrible situation. Just to add you a statistic, the Uganda Demographic Survey of 2000 by Uganda Bureau of Statistics 2006 indicated that up to 70% of women reported that, beating of domestic violence is just part of male-female relationship.
So they've come to accept
they accept that. They accept that. But through public education and sensitization and, work around dignity, they do realize that there is life, that the world is enough for men, women to live happily. But talking about children, this is very traumatic because it's not just that they feel the trauma, the pain, but children that grow up in families that every day they see violent acts tend to have those and take those behaviors as well when they grow up. Now, in our center, several of the centers, women often report with their children. They leave homes with their children. So we have a special initiative and program for women that have children, and we have a separate place for their own type of counseling and stuff like that. And also when we do a lot of mediation, and many of the cases that come to our center eventually get reintegrated, not just in a discussion between the man and the woman, but as well the family, the elders and the like. So the issue of children participating in a way in resolution of conflicts is really, really important. But counseling is something that we also do quite a bit to children. But it's terrible for children to go through this and feel it every day.
Okay, and maybe as we wind up, we've had cases of cases where women report their husbands to authorities. The husbands are apprehended, and then they are later released, and then they go back home, and the beating continues. And the woman will say something like, "He's my husband, and when he's not drunk, he's okay, so I can live with him." So how are you as Action Aid empowering women to try and put an end to this violence that's being meted out against them, especially in rural areas?
I think the approach that we do have as an organization is holistic. We don't just, the problem many of the initiatives have is targeting women only for education. And yet, 80% of women that report domestic violence, it's because of the partner beating them. So it is important for the partner also to appreciate that a stable home is good for them. Men need to better appreciate that the dignity of women is as much important for them as it is to men. So what we do in our approach is when we do the mediation and reconciliation, it has both parties. And quite honestly, for most of the women that go through our centers, be it a case of land, be it a case of inheritance, whatever, is really, they don't report back. They report back rate, and we do follow-ups as well in the family to keep, so it's much better. But Action Aid is just one small NGO, and the scale is much, much higher. But I think the final point is, how do you deal with the household political economy? And I do think that a very sensible and comprehensive family law is important to deal with the very root causes of domestic violence, so that women take their rightful place and that men better appreciate that all of us, different genders, are made by God, and we all have a contribution. So I do think if there is one important recommendation I can give, especially to parliamentarians, is to get back that discussion of the family law, the marriage and divorce legislation. That's very, very important.
Perfect point to close this discussion, but we'll definitely be back next weekend to talk about the interlink between domestic violence and HIV. Hope you'll be able to join us.
Thank you
so much for joining us on NTV. Let's talk.
Thank you.